Father Peter McVerry, you're someone that I have admired for a very long time, and it's a real privilege to be talking to you here this evening.
Thank you very much.
And you know, you are, I discovered quite relatively recently, born in Belfast, but so many of your early years were spent here in County Down.
Yes, I grew up in Newry until I was 18. Then I went to join the Jesuits, and there were no Jesuits in the north of Ireland at that time, so I had to go down south. So I grew up in Newry. Half of my growing up was in Newry, County Down, and the other half was in Newry, County Armagh. Our house was just outside the Down Armagh boundary, so it meant I could support whichever team Down or Armagh were doing the best at the particular time.
And your earliest memories, can you sort of share with us the first memories that you recall?
Yeah, I grew up in a small little house, excuse me, beside the town hall in Newry. The room at the back was my father's surgery, and next door to us was a coal yard. And remember, in the 50s, the coal yard was blown up by the IRA, and we all had to get out in the middle of the night, and we went to relatives for the night. I used to go over to the town hall regularly. We knew the person who was in charge, the caretaker of the town hall. He'd let us in to watch the boxing or whatever else was going on. So they were my earliest memories. Small house, very, very simple, really.
And your father was a doctor.
Yes.
And in a national health service, very different from today. And it'll be very interesting. I hope to tease that out with Mike Nesbitt, our health minister, in a few weeks' time. But can you tell me those memories of your dad attending to his patients? Very often there were calls in the middle of the night, weren't there?
Yeah, that's one of the things that influenced me particularly. He was a doctor in those early days when he was starting off. He didn't have an assistant or a partner. So he was there with his patients. And if the patients needed him, he had to go. So he was on duty 7 days, 7 nights a week. And I remember the phone going regularly at night time. My father would get up and go out to see his patients. Sometimes the phone would go twice in the night. And I never heard him complaining. So I think I got a sense of service there from my father.
And from your mother, I think. I read somewhere that you got a sense very much of religion from her. Is that right?
Yeah, my mother was originally a Welsh Protestant, excuse me, who converted to Catholicism in order to marry my father. Because in those days, if a Catholic married a Protestant, they were destined to go to hell for all eternity.
God, between us and all.
So to avoid that fate for my father, my mother became a convert. And like many converts, she became more Catholic than the Catholics themselves. And so, yeah, we had Sunday Mass, obviously, but family rosary at night time, no excuses, you couldn't miss it. So I got a sense of service from my father and a sense of faith from my mother. So when I was looking at what would I do with my life, I think I wanted to be of service within a faith context. And one way of doing that back in the 60s was to become a priest. And back in those days, families were delighted to have a son who wanted to become a priest. That has changed. But in those days, that was. So they supported me in the decision. They said, if that's what you want, we'll support you. So,
and had you a sense of vocation from very early on?
I think when I was going through secondary school, from an early age, I think, I'm going to become a Jesuit.
Yes, I was going to ask you how you actually found yourself in the Jesuits as opposed to maybe becoming a diocesan priest or becoming a member of some other congregation.
Well, my secondary school was in Clong was a boarding school run by the Jesuits. So I suppose I drifted into the Jesuits. If I had been at a Christian Brother school, I probably would have become a Christian Brother or whatever. So I was with the Jesuits. I knew the Jesuits. I liked the Jesuits. And the ones I knew were teachers. So I thought, yeah, I'll join the Jesuits. I'll become a teacher as well.
And what has always intrigued me is how this young man, brought up in a very comfortable family, middle class, Clongowes educated, and then suddenly there's this transmogrification that you become an advocate for, a campaigner for, a provider for homeless people. How did that come about?
I went in 1974 into the inner city of Dublin to live and work. And that was my conversion. The inner city of Dublin was the most deprived area in the whole country. The housing was awful. Much of the housing was old tenement buildings from the 1800s divided into flats for families. So there would be 8 families living in a house. There was no soundproofing between flats. I had a flat on the top floor. I could listen to the news on the television in the flat below me perfectly clearly. The place was crawling with rats. And the rats were the size of little kittens and immune from every poison that had ever been invented. So on the top floor, every night, all night, you listen to the rats running along the ceiling. They'd be fighting with one another, squealing, occasionally eating through the electric wires. All the lights would go out. But worse, on the ground floor, parents would tell you of waking up in the morning and finding a rat on the baby's cot. And for some of those houses, there was one outside toilet for the 8 families.
And we're talking here about Dublin inner city. You're talking about Summerhill, are you,
Dublin,
Sean?
yeah, Summerhill, Sean McDermott Street and Gardner Street particularly. This was in the centre of Dublin, 5-minute walk from O'Connell Street. And those conditions continued right up until 1980, when eventually they were demolished. But the housing was terrible. The unemployment rate was about 80%, because people in that part of the city traditionally worked on the docks beside them, loading and unloading ships. And then in the 60s and 70s, containerisation came in, and the big cranes did all the lifting, and they had no jobs to go to. So a young person growing up in that environment, lousy housing, never expected to get a job. So they said to themselves, what's the point in staying on in school? So the issue that hit me when I went there first wasn't homelessness. It was young people leaving school early. Many of them were leaving school at the very latest by the age of 12. They were hanging around the streets all day long. Parents were unemployed, couldn't give them any money. So what were they doing? A little bit of robbing. And by the time they got to 16 and 17, they were doing an awful lot of robbing and they were going to jail.
So by this time, and by this time you had, if you like, renounced the idea of actually becoming a science teacher, because I gather you taught science for a couple of years in Belvedere College. And I suppose I'm curious then about how that Jesuit ministry to the homeless then emerged. You know, rather than you go off, abroad to study or do something else, how then did that ministry to the homeless come into being?
Well, 2 things shocked me when I went there. One was the conditions people lived in. But the other thing that shocked me was I had been living in Dublin for many years before that. And I was totally unaware of the conditions that people lived in 5 minutes from the city centre of Dublin. So that shocked me. So I worked there. I worked with young people. We opened a youth club for all the young people. We opened a craft centre. They could make lovely crafts, sell them, make a few bob legitimately. And we were able to employ some of the young people making the crafts, and we'd sell them to the shops in town to pay their wages. And so I said, well, I'll do that for a couple of years, and then maybe I'll go off and do something else. So you got to know the people there, and these were people that society had written off. The inner city was considered to be a place where everybody was robbing and everybody was had no future. But I got to know the people there, and I got to respect the people there. And I saw a totally different side to them. They were people who had enormous potential, great goodness, but they were very, very oppressed by the living situation and the lack of opportunities that were available to them. So that's what kept me there.
And what motivated you? What drove you? Because clearly there was something within you as a priest. Was it the Beatitudes? Was it the teaching in the Old Testament? What was it that drove you to do this?
What started it was when I was teaching in Belvedere College. Now, Belvedere College is a fee-paying school in the city centre of Dublin, and I was playing on the cricket team. Now, playing cricket for Old Belvedere was about as further from the inner city as you could possibly imagine. But there was a guy on the cricket team who was running a youth club for the flats at the back of Belvedere. And he invited me up to come and have a look. And I went up to the youth club and I loved it. And I loved working with the kids there. They were totally different from the kids in Belvedere. They wore different masks. They were much more direct to you. I mean, if they didn't like you, just tell you to fuck off. I mean, no kid in Belvedere would say that to a teacher. So I really loved working with them, and I ended up running the club and running football teams in the club. And then when the Jesuits looked for an opportunity to go and work and live in a deprived area, and they were offered an apartment in a flat in Summerhill. Yeah, because my experience with those young people had been such a positive one, I jumped at the chance, said, look, I'll volunteer. I'll go and I'll see what happens. So I went, I saw, and I stayed.
And something also dramatically happened within the Jesuit order, wasn't it? Around 1974, there was a development in teaching.
Well, in the early 70s, coming from Latin America was the whole liberation theology and the whole concept that the promotion of justice was an integral part of living the faith. Now, we Jesuits weren't doing any of that. So we said we'd better start doing it. So Jesuits looked, as I say, for an apartment, a flat from the local authority in a poor area, where we could go and live and just see what happens. So we went there, we got a flat there, 3 of us went there, and it was, for the first 6 months we did absolutely nothing, except visiting families in the area. And
this would have been late 70s?
This would have been 74.
Okay.
Yeah. And we did nothing, and doing nothing was the best thing we did, because it allowed us to try and assess what are the needs that we should be addressing. Whereas I've seen in other places, people went into deprived areas, one became a teacher, one worked in the church, and they lost the freedom then to get involved in the essential needs of people. So we did nothing. And as I say, the issue of young people leaving school early hit me straight between the eyes. And so we set about opening services for young people. And the services were in our flat. And again, that's a real tribute to the people of the inner city. Our flat on the top floor became a youth club and a craft centre. And you had all sorts of noise coming from it. As I say, there's no soundproofing. You had all these kids, 40, 50 kids coming up and down the stairs at all times of the day and night, and not one of the neighbours complained. They were delighted to see the kids being involved and having something positive to do. And I don't think you'd have found that in any other area. But there was that real sense of community and a real sense of caring, and delighted that these kids were not just hanging around the street robbing, but that they were being engaged and making these crafts. The crafts were beautiful. They were able to bring them down. They were able to give them to their friends and their family. They were able to sell them to the neighbours. They were really wonderful. So people were very supportive of us.
And then, of course, you had to move from that base in, was it around Sean McDermott Street in Summerhill?
Yeah.
And tell us about that.
We had to move to Ballymun.
You had to move to Ballymun.
Well, they demolished the whole area, including our flat. But in those 6 years, as I say, homelessness wasn't the issue for me. In fact, it was a very small issue at that time. But I was working with these young people in the area, pretty well every young person in the area. was working with us. And then I came across a kid sleeping on the street 9 years of age. So he said, look, we have a youth club, we have a craft centre, we have employment schemes for the young people here. Let's get a house and open a little hostel. So we did, we got a house. We took in 6 boys, including that 9-year-old kid. We took in 6 boys up to the age of 16. Why boys? There were no girls on the streets back in the 1970s. That only came later. So I went to the authorities, to the government. I said, look, we're going to open this hostel for some of these kids who are living on the street. Will you support us? And they said, no way. We don't agree with it. We don't support it. We won't support it. They saw these kids as little mini criminals. They were hanging around the street. They were doing a bit of robbing. So they thought, here's kids who just don't want to be at home. They want their freedom. They want to go out and be robbing, and they should be locked up. So that was the mindset towards these kids.
Very judgmental.
Oh, very judgmental. So they said, no, we're not going to support you. But eventually they did support us because the inner city was beginning to explode. There was a lot of car stealing. And on a couple of occasions, literally, I looked out my window and I could see a few kids in a stolen car passing out a guard the car and beeping the horn in order to get a chase. It was that bad. And there was a lot of handbag snatching. And Summerhill was a main route into town for people going to work in the morning and a main route back in the evening. And in the middle of Summerhill, there was a pedestrian traffic lights. And you'd have a kid on the roof of the flats looking down. And when he saw a woman on her own in the car with her handbag on the passenger seat, he would send a signal down to a kid at the traffic lights. He would press the lights, cars would stop, and a third kid would come out from the flats, smash the window, grab the handbag and be gone. And this was happening on a daily basis. So there was, the media were all over this, saying, what is the government going to do? So what the government did was they opened Loughlin House up in County Cavan as a juvenile prison for these kids with prison officers who had 2 weeks childcare training.
Just outside Black Lion.
That's right. It was an adult prison. It was an adult prison. They converted it into a juvenile prison. It's back now as an adult prison. But there was an outcry from all the childcare services that if all you're going to do for these deprived inner city kids is lock them up 200 miles away. And so our proposal to open a hostel for some of these kids was on the minister's desk, and the minister jumped at it. Not because he wanted to, not because he saw the need, not because he wanted to support us, but to deflect the criticism that was coming his way over the opening of Loughlin House as the only response to these kids. So he said, okay, we'll support you. So it was the first time in my life I had a good relationship with the authorities. They'd be ringing me up saying, when can you get this hostel going? When can you get it open? And I'd say, well, we need a guarantee that you're going to fund it 100%. Okay, they said, we'll fund it 100%. And we need a minibus. Okay, we'll give you a minibus.
You had them over a bar.
So we opened that hostel for, as I say, for young boys. And I ran that then for a couple of years. And then they were leaving that at 16 and a half, and they were going back on the streets.
And so then the organisation that you were bringing along then obviously attained a certain structure, and something called the Arrupe Society was formed, and that was basically took its inspiration from Father Pedro Arrupe, the very inspirational Superior General of the Jesuits. And
that's right.
So that happened, and of course you were being given full support by your superiors to get on with it.
We had to form an organisation. If we wanted to get state funding, we had to. They weren't going to give state funding to an individual like me. And Father Pedro Arrupe, we consider him the second founder of the Jesuits, very charismatic and very committed to the promotion of social justice. So named the organisation after him. Subsequently, many years later, our fundraising committee came to me and said, look, could we ever change the name? Nobody ever heard of Arrupe. We spend all our time trying to explain that it's not a North American Indian tribe. Could we ever change the name to Peter McVerry Trust? So I said, well, often they name people to name something after somebody when they're dead. Is this wishful thinking on your part? They said, no, it would make our fundraising much easier. So very reluctantly, I agreed to them changing the name. That's...
And that became subsequently the Peter
Peter
McVerry
McVerry Trust.
Yeah. And in terms of, you mentioned a phrase earlier, liberation
Theology.
Yeah. Can you just unpack that sort of in simple language? Where do we get that from?
It came from the experience of many, many people, priests and lay people working in South America with people who are very poor. And so they saw and they read the Gospels, and I read the Gospels now in a very different way to the way I used to read them. But they read the Gospels as Jesus was very committed to the poor. His life was a life of compassion. He gave his life for our sake. He self-sacrificed himself for our sake. He reached out to those who were unwanted and cast aside in his society. And so they read the Gospels from their experience of working with the poor. And so they felt that this option for the poor was an integral part of living the Gospel. And that meant not just compassion for poor people, but challenging the very structures, the economic and social and political structures that created poverty and kept people poor. It meant challenging that, and that meant challenging political leadership. So that's where it came from. It came over to Ireland and to Europe, and it was very strong in the 1970s and 80s, but sort of faded away a lot in the last few decades.
And of course, Pope St. John Paul, he was very suspicious of the liberation theology.
He was. I think the reason for that was the liberation theology had the potential to split the church into the conservatives, who saw the church as laying down laws, and that reaffirming those laws was what the church should be doing. And many of those laws were around sexual morality. So abortion and same-sex marriage and divorce and contraceptives and all that were out, and the church should be reinforcing those laws. And then there were the progressives who saw that this liberation theology, the option for the poor, was really at the heart of the gospel. So Pope John Paul saw this had the potential to split the church. And he understood from his experience in Poland with the communists that you needed a very unified church if you are going to challenge the political establishment. And so I think he was a little bit afraid of it.
But you clearly had undergone something of a transformation or a conversion of some kind because you had come from a very comfortable background, and I think that you have described the early Peter McVerry as very pious. Were you a bit of a holy Joe?
I was, very much so, yeah.
And then you came to basically to critique that sort of that excessive piety.
Yeah, I saw a lot of things happening in the inner city which upset me. I'd see a kid who might break a window and he'd be brought down to the police station and he'd get a hiding in the police station. And I'm saying to myself, 2 crimes have been committed. The minor crime, the breaking of the window, this guy is going to be processed, brought to court, potentially jailed. The bigger crime, the assault on him, is done by a very respectable member of society who is probably in the future going to be promoted. There's something very wrong with our moral code in a situation like that. So one kid said to me once, he said, the very thought there might be a God depresses me. And I was trying to figure out what he meant, because I'm used to young people telling me they don't believe in God. That's par for the course. But this was going one step further. And I came to realise what he was trying to say. He felt he was a bad person. He'd been living on the street from a very early age. He had broken every law in the book, and 1 or 2 others. So he had robbed, he had slept around, he'd taken drugs, he'd done everything. So he felt he was a bad person, and if there's a God up there, God was looking down at him, and God was saying, there's someone I couldn't love. And he felt if he died and went before God, God would say, get away from me, you bad person. I don't want anything to do with you. Now, I knew that kid, and that kid had grown up in a home where he suffered a lot of abuse, a lot of violence, and extreme neglect. And I am saying to myself, if there is a God, God must have a special place in God's heart for this kid because of what he has suffered. And if he died and went to meet God, God must have a big warm welcome for him. And so I came to realize he was believing in a God of the law, a God who had laid down laws, and this was the conservative the Catholic position, a God who had laid down laws, and your relationship with God depended on how you kept those laws. If you kept those laws well, you were in a good relationship with God. If you didn't, you were in a bad relationship with God. And I knew that kid, and I came to believe in a God of compassion. Our God is a God of compassion. And therefore, if we are going to grow into the image and likeness of God, we have to grow in compassion. So for me, God's passion is not the observance of the law. That's what I was brought up to believe. God's passion is compassion and reaching out to those in need. And that was a moment for me. And then I read the Gospels differently. I used to read the Gospels as Jesus telling me what I had to do in order to earn a place in heaven. Now I read the Gospels as instructions to the early Christian community as to how they are to live together in order to be the kingdom of God here on earth. And living together means reaching out to the poor, meeting people's needs, reaching out to those who are outcast. That's what the gospel is saying to us as Christian communities. That's how we ought to be living.
And do you think that the church has come late to basically teach that? Because really we only have, it's only really in the last few decades we have had Pope Francis, who has, of course, a fellow Jesuit who said the sort of things that that you were saying now. Do you think there was a sort of a shift after John Paul II and Benedict when Francis came?
Well, a lot of people were very upset by Francis. The conservative side of the church were totally opposed to Francis. They were praying that he might have a happy but sudden death. So they were very unhappy. We all get locked into our own little worlds, and we all get locked into that comfort zone that we inhabit. And liberation theology was challenging our comfort zones. It was challenging us to reach out, to go beyond self-centeredness. And for many people that was very threatening, and they didn't want to know. So Francis did. John Paul was actually quite socially progressive, but not to the same extent, obviously. So Francis put the option for the poor at the very centre of the church's mission. The first thing he did was go down to Lampedusa and bring a few immigrants back, a few asylum seekers back to live in the Vatican. Visited the prisons regularly, particularly on Holy Thursday. He'd wash their feet. He set up showers in the St. Peter's Square for homeless people. He had food centres there for homeless. So he put reaching out to the poor and the unwanted at the very heart of the church's mission and ministry. And that has upset us and still upsets a lot of people.
And in your experience, and you probably know more about homelessness and you know more about young offenders than many people. You probably could write several PhDs on that subject. Do you think that we as a society still overlook the backstory that you have found? Because I think a theme of what you have said down the years is that when you encounter offending and petty crime or more serious crime even, that there's a backstory there that we have to take account of as a society.
There's almost always a story. I always say, yes, you can condemn the behaviour, but we cannot condemn the person because we don't know what's gone on in anybody's childhood. We dealt with a young fella, he lived with his mother and his sister. himself and his sister were very close together. Mother had an alcohol problem. She also had a mental health problem. And when he was 12 years of age, his mother stabbed his sister to death in front of him. Dealt with a young man knocked on my door late at night, 11 years of age, said, "Can I stay?" And I said, "No, you can't stay. You're only 11, I said. And anyway, you have a home to go to." "Oh, I can't go home," he said. "Why can't you go home?" I asked him. "Just can't go home." Talked to him for a while, persuaded him to go home, put him into my car, drove him up to his house, said, "There you are, in you go." "Can't go in," he said. "Why can't you go in?" I asked him. "I just can't go in." Talked to him for another little bit, discovered his alcoholic parents were sending him out every night into prostitution. He had to come back with a certain amount of money, otherwise he'd get a beating, and he had no money that night. So for all those people who commit crimes, there's a story behind it. And you read if you read the court's reports in the newspapers, people who are up in court for all sorts of offences, some serious, some not so serious. There's often a harrowing childhood story behind that person's life. And in fact, I would say that almost every homeless person that I have ever worked with has suffered abuse, either in early childhood or in early adulthood. And that has shaped their lives. They can't cope with the abuse, so what do? They start drinking heavily or taking drugs. They can't afford to do that, so they go robbing to feed their drug habit. They get arrested, they go to jail. So what are we doing? We're imprisoning them because they can't cope with the crimes that were committed against them. We're victimizing them a second time instead of trying to address the issues that led them to crime in the first place.
And you mentioned abuse there, and of course clerical sexual abuse has cast a long shadow over the Catholic Church over the past several decades. That's now. Right. And we heard earlier that you had taught in Belvedere College, and before that, of course, you were a student in Clongowes, and indeed the Jesuits in Ireland have come forward very forthrightly, more so than many other congregations, some people might say, in owning up to the abuse that has happened, and indeed Belvedere College and Clongowes has been mentioned. Did you ever experience clerical sexual abuse yourself in either of those institutions or elsewhere?
I never experienced it, and I never knew of it. It came as a complete shock to me that there had been priests there who were abusing pupils. That came as a complete shock to me when it came out into the open. Yeah, I knew some of the priests there, and yeah, they were pretty unpleasant characters, bullies, and
corporal punishment would have been a very
corporal punishment was the norm
factor.
But with the Jesuits, the teacher could not administer corporal punishment. If the teacher had to give the pupil a note to go to somebody else to get punished, and that was an attempt to prevent somebody taking out their anger or whatever on a pupil. It had to be done in a sort of neutral venue. Yeah.
And those horrors that have unfolded over the past many years now, did they ever sort of shake your own sort of faith, or indeed your confidence in the church?
No, it didn't shake my faith. I think my faith is supported by the people homeless people that I work with. Remember, I say Mass every Sunday in one of the prisons in Dublin, and I remember,
isn't that right? Wheatfield
prison. Yeah. And I remember when the first report of abuse in the Dublin diocese came out, and I went up to say, I was wondering what sort of reception am I going to get now, because half these prisoners were probably abused either in the institutions, children's institutions, or by priests in the diocese. I was totally welcomed, They take you as a person. You're a person first who is a priest. You're not a priest who happens to be Peter McVerry. So they take you very much as you are. There was absolutely no animosity towards me whatsoever. So it didn't shake my faith, but it certainly left you very I won't say depressed, but it was a real downer. It was a real blow, a gut blow to the stomach to read of and discover all the abuse that was going on.
But you kept on with your ministry. And can you now, and it's hard to believe that Father McVerry is 81 years of age. Peter, can you then just explain or just sort of describe a typical day in your life now?
Well, a typical day now is I spend my day engaged with homeless people. I have retired from all the administration of our organisation. We have a large organisation now. We have 25 hostels all over Dublin, a few in Kildare. We have about 800 homeless people staying every night in the hostels. We have about 600 apartments where we can give a homeless person the key of the door and say, this is yours for the rest of your life. You never ever have to be homeless again. We have 3 drug treatment centres. We have a drop-in centre, and we actually run 2 small schools. We have 2 small schools for young people who've been expelled from school or have simply dropped out.
That's not well known.
No, it's not. No, but it's very successful. And the reason for that is that most of the homeless people we deal with have left school early, and we hope by keeping these young people in school, and 95% of them stay, we hope that we can prevent them, or many of them anyway, from becoming the homeless adults of the future. So it's a large organisation. We have budgeted about 50 million, 500 full-time staff, and managing that, it was a nightmare. So on my 81st birthday, I retired from all the administration of the organisation, and now I leave that to others. Now my day is spent engaged with homeless people. So most homeless people in Dublin have my phone number. They ring me. I get 60, 80 calls a day. A lot of them know where I live. So I'd get 10 or 12 calling to the door every day, and I'd go to meet people. So it's a day spent helping homeless people in whatever way they want help. With advice, with access to accommodation, access to drug treatment, access to funding perhaps. That's what I spend my day doing.
Now, because it's well known that the Peter McVerry Trust has had its troubles of late, and you've had 2 regulatory bodies, one into charities and one into housing bodies that found you wanting in some respects, and I know you have a new board and a new leadership and all the rest of it. Where do you think things went wrong?
I can't say too much about this because we're still engaged with the regulators. But what I can say is that nobody was pocketing the money. We spent money we didn't have. And we spent money inappropriately. People gave us money maybe to buy a property, and we ran out of money. We spent it on salaries. So we spent money inappropriately, but there was nobody pocketing the money, and nobody was spending it on their holidays to Bermuda. We spent money we didn't have, borrowed money we shouldn't have borrowed, and spent money in a way that we shouldn't have spent, not in line with the donor's intentions. So that all erupted. We're in the process of resolving all that. The regulators have required certain changes. We've made all those changes. So I hope that probably within the next 4 or 6 months we'll emerge from this completely, and we'll get back. However, with all that controversy, none of our services were affected. The hostels still run. The houses we have where we give people, homeless people, a place for life. The drug treatment centres, the schools, they all continue to run as before. It hasn't affected homeless people in the slightest. It's affected us and the board certainly very much, but it hasn't affected homeless people.
Because I read somewhere that you know the government did bail you out. Maybe you were too big and you were too important to fail. 15 million euros was it, and that the government then is clawing back 50 properties. Is that affecting your operation?
No, not at all. Many of the properties we have were bought with a grant from the local authority because we don't have the money to, 3 properties is going to cost you $1 million. We don't have that sort of money. So we would buy the properties with a grant from the local authority. So what's happening now is we're giving the properties back to the local authority in lieu of the 15 million that we got. But the homeless people still continue to live there, and we still continue to support them. So in a way, it doesn't really matter who owns the property. So that doesn't affect the operation whatsoever.
And you would say that. So you say that the problem is being fixed. You're confident that it will be resolved, and that you will be able to carry on what you're doing, the good work that you are doing into the future.
Yeah, I'm very confident of that. Very confident.
And I suppose, we have mentioned Pope Francis. We have mentioned another famous, he's probably the most famous Jesuit of the 21st century. We have mentioned Father Pedro Arrupe, the most famous Jesuit of the 20th century. But what about the current Pope, Pope Leo? What do you make of him?
Well, my biggest criticism of Pope Francis, I was hoping he'd make about 50 Jesuit cardinals, and we could keep the papacy for the next couple of generations.
Right.
He's given it to an Augustinian.
A bit like Dublin holding on to the Sam Maguire Cup.
Pope Leo, he's just produced his first exhortation. It's excellent. It's very much in line with Pope Francis. So I think he will continue Pope Francis's commitment to the poor and to structural change. But he isn't as charismatic, he isn't as outgoing as Pope Francis was, but that's okay. It's a different personality. But I think he will be just as committed as Francis to the direction that Francis took the church in, much to the regret of the conservative part of the church.
And of course, Pope Francis' big idea was synodality. This whole idea of through prayer and discernment, working out what the direction of the church would be, but also giving lay people and religious and others, but particularly lay, but not exclusively lay people, a role in a real meaningful role in working out what the future of the church would be in, as Catholics would believe, in accordance with the Holy Spirit. Do you think that Pope Leo, he seems to be very much continuing that synodal path?
I think so, and I think he has to. The tradition in the church for centuries, it was a top-down church. People at the top, the Pope and the bishops and the cardinals, they made the decisions and they handed those decisions down to the laity. And that led to a whole lot of problems. And it was a very unsatisfactory way to operate. So synodality is giving, we believe that the church is the people of God, all Christians. And therefore the people of God should be able to discern and make decisions. And synodality is an attempt to allow that to happen, to allow people to allow from below, reflection and assessment and make decisions. So synodality, but it'll take several generations, because I think the difficulty with synodality as it is that it's those who are already committed Christians, generally elderly and more conservative, have engaged in the synodal process. There has been very little engagement from young people, for example, who are alienated from the church, or from others who disagree with the church. And I think it'll take a while for them to engage, and their voices have to be heard if we are truly to be a synodal church. Yeah.
Now, today, in fact, given the day that's in it, we had Pope Leo and King Charles praying together in the Vatican, and tomorrow we have the Irish presidential election. So I suppose I have to ask you, if you had 5 minutes with the new president of Ireland, what would you say to her?
What would I say to her? It's largely a ceremonial role. They don't have any power. They can articulate values And I would hope, first thing Michael D did when he became president was that he came to Mass in Ballymun. It's a very deprived area. And I would hope that Catherine Connolly would...
You're giving us an exclusive now, are you?
I'm not going to tell you who I'm going to vote for, or even if I'm going to vote. I have problems with both candidates, but I would hope that whoever it is, and it looks like a dead cert to be Catherine Connolly, that that value of respecting the dignity of people who are poor and people who are pushed aside by society, respecting the dignity of migrants, I would hope that she would forcefully
Do you know Catherine
communicate
Connolly,
that.
by the
No,
way?
I never met her, no.
But you'll be hoping, obviously, that that a president, of course, is meant to be to articulate the conscience of the nation. So I suppose you would expect some prophetic observations from the incoming president.
It would be nice. Do I expect it? No. But it would be nice.
And, of course, a big issue that keeps coming up, particularly in this post-Brexit situation that we have, is, of course, the future constitutional arrangements in Ireland. And I did note that somewhere, reflecting on your childhood, you said, yes, you came from a Catholic family in Newry, and you looked to the south. But I think you said that you weren't exactly in favour of reunification, of joining up with the South. Would you like to share with us any thoughts that you might have on the constitutional future of the country?
Yeah, it would be, I think we should be reunited, obviously. It's absurd having and controlling this northern part of the island. However, we made it, our position was purely economic. We had a much better lifestyle in the north. We had free education, we had free health. You didn't have that down south. You had a better standard of living. Why would you give that up to for an ideal? And I think most people would decide on reunification on economic terms. If it's going to, and it will affect people down south, it will cost a lot of money, which will come out of people's pockets down south. If Ireland became reunited, presumably that Britain wouldn't continue the subsidies, the vast subsidies that Northern Ireland get at the moment. So I think it's economic considerations will determine whether Ireland becomes reunited or not.
But the people that you meet day and daily in North Dublin, I'd be surprised if the North very much impinged upon their consciousness.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's not. No, the only thing in the north is you go up to Newry for their shopping at Christmas. That's we used to bring kids up to the north. We'd bring them out on outings, and we'd go up to. My mother lived in Newry. We'd bring them up to Newry. We'd go camping in Omeath, which is beside Newry. Bring them up to my mother. But when we went up to Armagh then to visit somebody, and we had a minibus. And I had to tell the kids, look, when we meet the British Army, keep your mouth shut. Because they would certainly give them a torrent of abuse. So I had to warn them to keep their mouths shut.
Well, we'll thank you very much indeed for the time you have already shared with us, and I hope that you can stay for a little while for some questions. But I should take this opportunity of just saying to the audience that on this night, 3 weeks, on Thursday the 13th of November, we have another event in the conversation series here in the St. Patrick's Centre, and my old friend and colleague from the BBC, Stephen Walker, will be here in conversation with Gareth Gordon, another friend and BBC colleague of some years back, talking about Stephen's book, David Trimble, The Peacemaker. So we hope that you might consider putting that in your diary. But just for now, it's a wee bit difficult to sort of see folk here with the lights, but are we in a position to, is there a roving mic perhaps?
On the left there, a couple of questions.
Okay. Yes, sir.
My question is a sort of shock horror audience come to listen to Catholic priests talking about caring for the homeless and the poor. So you stand out as an outlier. It strikes me that the Church in Ireland hasn't really made the journey 50 years later. We're still to be converted in the sense of the call to the option for the poor. I don't see it in the Church. That's why you're such an outlier.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the church's, well, the church's focus is on sacramental maintenance. You know, baptisms, first communions, confirmations, weddings, funerals. And certainly young people today say, what has this got to do with my life? And they're totally alienated from it. But so I think the church has moved in a certain way in that direction. Church has certainly become more compassionate. It says the right things now about reaching out to the poor, and that compassion is an integral part of our Christian values. But it hasn't gone the whole way to challenging the structural causes of poverty and the maintenance of poverty. And I can understand that, because as priests we weren't brought up to do that. We were taught to be kind, to work with individuals, to counsel people, to advise people, but challenging the structures. I remember the Archbishop of Dublin, Desmond Connell, when he became Archbishop, we invited him to come and speak at the Mass in Ballymun. And we said, would you talk about unemployment? Because there's a big unemployment area. He said, look, I know nothing about unemployment. I've never been taught or anything about unemployment. I'd only put my foot in it if I said something about unemployment. And because most of the priests now are quite elderly, they haven't been brought up in that culture where you challenge the structures, and so they just they feel powerless to be able to do that. So I think it will take time, but I do believe we're moving in the right direction.
Yes.
I am in absolute awe of what you've done, and it's absolutely amazing.
Thanks, Bruce.
I felt the word alienation was very strong indeed, and it's something that my wife and I are very concerned about with the youth. So I'm going to ask the question, if Pope Leo was here for 5 minutes, what would the question be to him about the youth?
Well, I'd tell him what I would do. I would love every parish. Young people will engage in social activities. If you ask a young person to do something for someone in need, they will jump to it. I spoke at a gathering of young people who had spent several months working in their local community. There were about 1,000 of them, and they had all given up time to do that. And working maybe in hospitals with the sick, or in areas of poverty. Young people will do that. So I think the way to get young people into the church is not by trying to get them back to Mass, because they're not going to come back to Mass, no. The way to do it is to get them involved in reaching out to people in need in their area. And they will do that, and they'll do that very willingly. And then you can bring them to understand that this is part of what a Christian faith is asking of people to do. And it's the essence of what the Eucharist is. The Eucharist for me is Jesus' self-sacrifice for us, giving himself for us. And when the priest says at the consecration, do this in memory of me, what he's saying is, do what Jesus did. Go out and sacrifice yourself for the sake of those in need. And you can bring young people then to appreciate the gospel and appreciate the Eucharist if they come from a situation where they are engaging with people in need. And I think they will do that. The future of the church is not going to be in parishes. The future of the church is going to be in small, basic Christian communities. Small communities of Christians who come together to pray together, to celebrate the Eucharist together, and to have an outreach to people who are in need. I think that's where the future is going to be. It's going to be a much, much smaller church, but a church of very, very committed Christians.
Yes, back row there, yes.
50 years on from 1974, do you get any feedback from any of those young people that you put through in those early days?
All the time. Yeah, I'm constantly, some of them are still living with us. That 9-year-old kid on the street, he's still living with us. Now he's in his 60s now. And he's gone blind. But we have a little complex of 8 bungalows for homeless people with serious physical or mental health problems, and we have 24-hour nursing on site, and he has one of those little bungalows. So some of the people that I dealt with 50 years ago are still in touch with me, but I'm constantly meeting people on the street. They come up to me and say, "Hello, Peter, do you know who I am?" I say, "No." And they say, "Oh, I was with you maybe 15 years ago. I was living in one of your hostels, or I went through your drug treatment, and it's changed my life. And I'm working now. I have a family, I have a house, and it's all thanks to the service that you provided." So that is constantly happening. Yeah, I get a lot of very, very positive feedback from people that we worked with. There's also the other side. I have photographs of myself with young people, and they're all dead. They're all dead from overdose mostly, occasionally a suicide. And there are some of them who are in prison, maybe serving longer sentences. So I would send money up to some of them every couple of weeks in prison to help them with tobacco. So some have, I won't say have failed, they haven't failed. They tried very hard but couldn't make it. And others have done very well for themselves. And that's the nature of the work.
Well done, you.
I remember...
Yes, please.
Wondering, Father, about the state of immigration here.
Yeah.
How should we deal with that? How do we react? Is there room for everybody? People think there's not room for everybody. Do we draw a line? What should we be thinking?
First of all, I think we should be welcoming those people. They are fleeing, many of them fleeing from persecution, from threats of death, from war. They're coming from a far worse situation than any of the homeless people that I deal with. And I think we have an obligation to provide them with safety and somewhere to live. Now, there are problems. The service, the housing, the health and the education services are not able to adequately meet their needs. Local people will complain that, they can't get their children into the local school because the immigrant children are there. Can't get an appointment with a doctor because the immigrant people have taken up the appointments, and they can't get housing because the immigrants have housing. There are difficulties, but our objections should be focused on the government, not on the immigrants. It's the government's responsibility to make sure that those services are available to everybody, immigrants and Irish people. And so our complaint is with the government, not with the immigrants themselves. They are innocent victims in all of this as well.
don't see anyone with their hand up, but maybe there was a question that I maybe should have put to you, and it is this, that I look at you and you look, thank God, a very happy person. And I'm just wondering, what's the secret? Because you do exude a certain grace and a certain happiness. Now, you did say to me that you hadn't experienced any of the horrors that we have read about and heard accounts of. You've been able to get on with your mission to if you like, be, insofar as you can, the hand of Jesus directing, working with homeless people. So, in terms of yourself, what's here you are, 81 years of age, and you're looking very content.
I think part of it is I love what I'm doing. Wouldn't want to do anything else. If I starting all over again, I would do exactly the same. Didn't feel that way when I started. When I started, if I had seen what was going to happen over the next 50 years, I'd have run a mile. I'd have said, no, I can't do that. I couldn't do that. But no, I love what I'm doing. I love working with homeless people. I think they're wonderful people when you get to know them. Unfortunately, we don't get to know them. We keep them at a distance, or we look down on them, or criticise them, maybe because they're using drugs or whatever. But they're really wonderful people when you get to know them. So I'm very happy doing what I'm doing. And secondly, my faith is a great source of strength to me. I believe I read the Gospels, as I say, in a different way now. The Gospels to me are challenging me to be the compassion of God. We get our faith, we get our Christian faith not to hold it as a personal possession, which gives us a comfort at times. No, we get our faith in order to transmit it to others. And so how do you communicate a God of compassion to people? You can only communicate a God of compassion to people by being the compassion of God to them. And so my faith confirms me in what I'm doing. And as I say, the fact that I love job satisfaction is so important. I have absolute job satisfaction. I wouldn't want to do anything else.
And what do you do to relax? Do you, after a very difficult day, and is there something that gives you sort of a bit of time to yourself?
No, I don't relax. No, I haven't had a holiday for 10 or 12 years. Don't take a day off. I sometimes get 8 hours sleep. So, but I've learned to cope. I think that's the answer. I've learned to cope. It's been far more difficult in previous times. There's far more pressure on you to respond. So I think I've learned to cope without having to explicitly switch off.
Well, it has been a privilege to have you in our company this evening. Thank you so much.
Delighted to have been there. Thank you.